Maybe if you stopped trying so hard to be the perfect mother, we could actually breathe around here." My daughter-in-law said it lightly, almost like a joke, while she reached for the mashed potatoes. A few people at the table chuckled politely, the kind of awkward laugh people give when they are not sure if something was meant to be funny or cruel. I smiled too. I've had a lot of practice smiling. The dinner table looked beautiful that evening. I had set it with my best china, the white plates with the thin gold rim that I'd saved for special occasions for nearly 30 years. The candles flickered softly between the dishes of roasted chicken, green beans, and warm dinner rolls. Outside the kitchen window, the early autumn air in Ohio had already turned cool, and the maple tree in my backyard was beginning to glow orange under the porch light. My son Daniel sat at the head of the table, scrolling through something on his phone before finally setting it down beside his glass of iced tea. Across from him, Ashley leaned back in her chair, perfectly relaxed, like someone who had just said something completely harmless. Maybe to her it was harmless. Maybe to everyone else it was just a passing comment during dinner. But something inside me went very still. I looked at the table, at the plates I had carefully warmed in the oven so the food wouldn't get cold too quickly, at the napkins I had folded the way my mother taught me when I was 23 years old and newly married, at my grandson Tyler, who was busy pushing peas around his plate with the tip of his fork. 40 years of trying. That was the thought that floated quietly through my mind. 40 years of trying to be the perfect mother. When Daniel was 6, I worked 2 jobs so he could join the little league team all his friends were playing on. I remember standing at the edge of the baseball field after my evening shift at the hospital cafeteria, still smelling faintly of coffee and bleach, cheering louder than anyone else in the stands when he hit his first clean single. When he was 17, I sold the small diamond ring my own mother had left me so he could afford his first year of college without worrying about tuition. I told him the ring had been too small for my finger anyway. That wasn't true, but he believed it. I believed that if I tried hard enough, if I showed enough love, enough patience, enough support, everything would stay whole. Families were supposed to work like that, weren't they? You give, and eventually the giving comes back to you in quiet ways. At least that was what I had always told myself. I reached for the gravy boat and poured a little onto Daniel's plate without asking, the way I had done since he was a boy. He didn't notice. He was already laughing at something Ashley was saying about a neighbor who had parked too close to their driveway. The candles flickered again. Their soft light danced across the gold rim of the plates, across the polished surface of the table I had spent an hour wiping down earlier that afternoon. I realized something then, sitting there in that warm kitchen filled with the smell of roasted chicken and butter. I had spent most of my life trying to become someone perfect for other people. The perfect mother. The dependable one. The one who always showed up early, stayed late, and made sure everyone else was comfortable before thinking about herself. And suddenly, listening to Ashley's words echo quietly in the back of my mind, I understood something that had taken me nearly 7 decades to see clearly. No matter how hard you try, perfection doesn't guarantee respect. Sometimes it only makes you easier to use. I lifted my glass of water and took a small sip. The coolness slid down my throat slowly. Across the table, Ashley was still talking, Daniel was nodding along, and Tyler had finally started eating his peas. The house felt warm, familiar, almost peaceful. But inside my chest, something had shifted, like a door quietly unlocking after being closed for years. And in that moment, though no one else at the table noticed a single thing had changed, I made a simple decision that would alter the rest of my life. Tomorrow, I would stop trying. I woke up earlier than usual the next morning. The house was quiet in the way it always is just before sunrise, when the world feels like it is holding its breath for a moment. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of black coffee warming my hands and watched the faint gray light spread slowly across the backyard. The maple tree stood still against the pale sky, its leaves rustling softly in the cool Ohio air. For years my mornings had followed the same pattern. I would check my phone first thing to see if Daniel or Ashley had sent a message. Sometimes it was a quick question about babysitting. Sometimes it was a reminder about a school pickup or a request to bring over dinner. I used to feel grateful every time the phone lit up with their names. It meant they needed me. It meant I still had a place in their busy lives. That morning my phone sat on the table beside my coffee mug. The screen stayed dark. I did not reach for it. I simply watched the steam curl slowly upward from the cup and listened to the quiet hum of the refrigerator in the corner. When Daniel was little, mornings were never quiet. He used to run down the hallway in his socks, sliding across the kitchen floor while asking what was for breakfast before I had even tied my hair back. Pancakes were his favorite. I remember standing at the stove flipping them one by one while he sat at the table swinging his legs under the chair, talking about dinosaurs or school projects or the stray dog he had seen near the playground. Back then I believed that if I gave him enough love and stability, he would grow up feeling safe and supported forever. Parenting felt like building a strong house one careful brick at a time. You worked hard. You sacrificed sleep and money and sometimes your own dreams, because you believed the finished house would stand for generations. I finished my coffee and rinsed the mug in the sink. The clock above the stove read 6:42. In the past, I would already be preparing something for someone else. Packing snacks for Tyler. Preheating the oven so I could deliver a casserole to Daniel and Ashley before they even asked. My calendar used to revolve around their needs the way the moon revolves around the earth. Slowly and quietly, I realized something else that morning. The world had not stopped spinning just because I had paused. The house still stood around me, warm and familiar. The maple tree still swayed gently. Outside the window, somewhere down the street a car door slammed, and a neighbor started his engine for the morning commute. Life was moving forward whether I rushed to serve it or not. Around 8:15 my phone finally buzzed. The sound echoed lightly across the kitchen counter. I glanced at the screen. Daniel. The message was short. Ashley has an early meeting today. Can you pick Tyler up from school this afternoon and watch him until 6? I read the sentence twice. There was no greeting, no question mark, just the assumption that I would rearrange my day the way I always had. For a long moment, I stared at the message. The old habit stirred inside me like a reflex. Of course I could help. Of course I would be there. That had always been my answer. I set the phone down again and walked slowly to the window. Sunlight had finally begun to reach the tops of the trees across the yard. The golden light touched the maple leaves and turned them into small, glowing pieces of fire. I thought about the quiet decision I had made the night before while the candles flickered on the dinner table. A decision no one else had noticed. My phone buzzed again on the counter. A second message appeared under the first. We need you there by 3:30. I stood there looking at the brightening sky outside the window, and for the first time in many years I did not rush to answer. I did not answer Daniel right away. The phone remained on the counter while the morning sunlight slowly filled the kitchen. For many years I would have replied within seconds. I would have typed something cheerful like "Of course I can help," or "I will be there." That was the rhythm of my life for a long time. Daniel asked. I showed up. I leaned my hands against the counter and looked around the room that had once been so full of noise. The kitchen still carried the faint smell of coffee and the clean scent of the lemon soap I used every morning. The clock ticked steadily on the wall. 8:27. Somewhere in the neighborhood a lawn mower started and then faded again in the distance. I thought about Tyler for a moment. My grandson had Daniel's brown hair and the same curious eyes he had when he was a little boy. I loved spending time with him. That part had always been real. But love and obligation are two different things. It took me many years to understand that. The phone buzzed again. Daniel was calling now. I let it ring once, twice, 3 times. Eventually the sound stopped and the kitchen became quiet again. A moment later another message appeared on the screen. Mom, are you there? I stared at the words. It was strange how such a simple question could carry so much expectation inside it. For most of my life the answer had always been yes. I was there when Daniel forgot his lunch in 3rd grade and called the house from the school office. I drove 15 miles across town to bring him a sandwich wrapped in aluminum foil because he sounded so worried on the phone. I was there when his car broke down during his first winter in college and he did not know who else to call. I remember driving through a snowstorm for nearly 2 hours just to sit with him in a quiet repair shop while the mechanic looked under the hood. I told myself that was what mothers did. You showed up. You fixed what you could. You filled in the gaps when life became inconvenient for the people you loved. The phone buzzed again. This time the message was shorter. We really need you today. I picked up the phone and held it in my hand. The screen glowed softly against my palm. I imagined the usual afternoon unfolding exactly the way it always had. I would leave the house at 3:15 and drive the familiar route to Tyler's elementary school. I would sit in the pickup line with the other grandparents and parents while the children walked out carrying their backpacks. Tyler would climb into the passenger seat, and start telling me about spelling tests and playground games before I even turn the key in the ignition. Then we would drive to Daniel and Ashley's house, where I would make a snack and help with homework while waiting for them to return from work. It was a routine I knew so well that I could picture every step of it without moving an inch. I set the phone down again. The quiet decision from the night before had not faded with the morning light. If anything, it felt clearer now. For the first time, I allowed myself to consider a different afternoon. One where I did not drive across town because someone expected it. One where I did not fill every empty hour with tasks meant to make other people's lives easier. Outside the window, the maple leaves moved gently in the breeze. Sunlight flickered through them like small golden sparks. I picked up the phone again and opened Daniel's message thread. My fingers hovered over the screen for a moment before I finally began to type slowly and carefully. I will not be able to pick Tyler up today. I read the sentence twice before sending it. It was a simple statement. Calm. Honest. The kind of sentence that should not have felt so difficult to write. The message disappeared from my screen and joined the others in the conversation. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then the phone buzzed almost immediately in my hand. Daniel was calling again. I watched the screen light up with his name. This time I answered. Daniel's voice came through the phone sharper than I expected. Mom, what do you mean you cannot pick him up? I stood near the kitchen window while the morning sun spread slowly across the floor. The light touched the wooden table and the old cabinet beside the refrigerator. Everything looked ordinary, almost peaceful, which made the moment feel strangely unreal. I will not be able to pick Tyler up today, I repeated calmly. There was a pause on the line. I could hear faint office sounds in the background on his side of the call. A door closing somewhere. Someone speaking in the distance. Daniel let out a slow breath. Mom, Ashley has an early meeting, and I have back-to-back appointments all afternoon. We really need you to help today. His voice was not angry yet. It carried that familiar tone he used when he assumed things would eventually go his way. For many years, that tone had been enough. I would have rearranged my entire day before he even finished the sentence. I looked out the window at the maple tree moving gently in the breeze. The leaves were brighter now, glowing orange in the clear morning light. I understand that you are busy, I said, but I will not be able to come today. Another silence followed. This one felt heavier. Mom, are you feeling all right? Daniel asked finally. The question almost made me smile. Yes, I said quietly. I am feeling perfectly fine. It is just that today I have other plans. The words felt unfamiliar as I spoke them. For a long time I had not allowed myself to have plans that did not revolve around someone else. Daniel hesitated. What kind of plans? I thought about that for a moment. The truth was I had not planned anything at all. My calendar was completely empty. But the empty space no longer felt like something that needed to be filled immediately. I am going out for a while, I answered. There are a few things I want to take care of. Daniel sounded confused now. Mom, you can do those things later. Tyler needs to be picked up at 3:30. I leaned against the counter and watched a small bird land on the fence outside the yard. It hopped once along the wooden rail before flying away again. Daniel, I said slowly, you will need to make other arrangements today. His reaction came quickly this time. Mom, this is really not convenient. Ashley already left for work and I cannot just leave the office in the middle of the afternoon. I listened to his frustration without interrupting. It reminded me of the way he sounded as a child when something unexpected happened. Back then I would fix the problem before it had time to grow. I would bring the forgotten homework to school. I would drive across town to deliver the missing sports uniform. But Daniel was no longer 8 years old. He was a grown man with a family and a house of his own. I am sure you will figure something out, I said gently. Another long pause filled the line. When Daniel spoke again, his voice was softer, but still uncertain. Mom, did Ashley say something last night that upset you? The question hung in the air between us. I thought back to the dinner table. The candles. The laughter. The careless sentence that had finally made something inside me shift. No, I said calmly. Ashley did not upset me. I am simply making a small change in my life. Daniel did not answer right away. I could almost hear him trying to understand what that meant. Well, this is a little sudden, he said finally. I suppose it is, I replied. Outside, the sunlight continued to brighten the yard and the quiet neighborhood beyond it. For the first time in many years, I felt no rush to explain myself further. I wished him a good day at work and ended the call before he could say anything else. I placed the phone down on the kitchen counter and stood there for a long moment, listening to the quiet house around me. The call with Daniel had lasted less than 3 minutes, but something about it felt strangely final. For years our conversations had followed the same pattern. He asked for help. I said yes before he even finished explaining what he needed. This time the pattern had changed, and I could almost feel the empty space where my automatic answer used to be. I walked slowly to the sink and rinsed the coffee cup I had left there earlier. The water ran warm over my hands while sunlight spread across the kitchen tiles. Outside, the street had begun to wake up. A delivery truck rolled past the house and stopped somewhere down the block. I dried my hands on a towel and glanced at the clock again. 9:12. The day was still wide open in front of me. For a moment, I stood there wondering what to do with that space. It felt unfamiliar, like stepping into a room you had lived beside for years but never entered. Eventually, I picked up my purse from the chair near the door and stepped outside. The air carried the cool scent of early fall, crisp and clean against my face. I locked the front door and walked down the small path that led to my driveway. My car sat exactly where it always had. A simple silver sedan that had taken me across town countless times for school pickups and grocery runs and quick visits to Daniel's house, whenever Ashley needed an extra pair of hands. I slid into the driver's seat and rested my hands on the steering wheel for a moment before starting the engine. The dashboard clock glowed softly in the quiet car. Instead of turning toward the familiar route that led to Daniel's neighborhood, I drove toward the center of town. The streets were lined with small shops and old brick buildings that had been there for decades. I realized how long it had been since I had walked through this part of town without a list of errands for someone else. I parked near the public library and stepped onto the sidewalk. The morning sun had warmed the pavement, and a gentle breeze moved through the trees that lined the street. People passed by carrying coffee cups and shopping bags, each of them absorbed in their own routines. For the first time in years, I did not feel like I was rushing toward the next obligation. I wandered slowly past the bookstore window and paused to look at the display inside. The smell of fresh paper drifted faintly through the open door. I stepped inside and let the quiet calm of the store settle around me. Shelves stretched from floor to ceiling, filled with novels and travel guides and biographies of people whose lives had unfolded in ways very different from my own. I ran my fingers lightly along the spines of a few books without choosing one. I was not looking for anything specific. I was simply enjoying the strange freedom of having time that belonged entirely to me. After a while, I stepped back outside and continued walking. A small cafe stood on the corner across the street, its outdoor tables scattered with people enjoying late morning coffee. I ordered a cup of tea and sat near the window where I could watch the street. The cup was warm in my hands, and the quiet hum of conversation around me felt comforting instead of demanding. For decades, my days had been shaped by the needs of other people. Every decision had been measured by how useful I could be. Sitting there with the soft sunlight on the table and the gentle noise of the cafe around me, I began to understand something simple but powerful. The world had never required me to disappear inside other people's lives. That had been my own choice. And now, slowly and carefully, I was learning how to choose something different. When I finished my tea at the cafe, I remained seated for a few minutes longer, watching people pass along the sidewalk outside the window. A young mother pushed a stroller slowly past the corner while speaking softly into her phone. Two men in business suits crossed the street with quick steps, their coffee cups balanced carefully in their hands. The world continued moving in its usual rhythm, and for the first time in many years I was simply observing it instead of rushing through it. I paid for my tea, thanked the young woman behind the counter, and stepped back outside into the mild afternoon air. The sky had turned a clear blue, and sunlight warmed the brick buildings along the street. I walked slowly toward my car, taking the long route around the block instead of heading straight to the parking space. The quiet decision I had made the night before still rested calmly inside me, like a steady flame that no longer flickered with doubt. When I reached the car and sat behind the wheel, I noticed my phone lighting up on the passenger seat. 3 missed calls. 2 from Daniel. 1 from Ashley. A moment later the phone buzzed again, vibrating softly against the fabric of the seat. Ashley's name appeared on the screen this time. I watched it ring until the sound stopped. Almost immediately a message appeared. "Margaret, we are in a difficult situation. Daniel told me you refused to pick Tyler up today." The message remained on the screen while I started the car. I did not answer right away. Instead, I drove slowly out of the parking space and turned toward the road that led back to my neighborhood. The afternoon traffic was light. A few cars moved through the intersection ahead of me while the traffic light changed from green to yellow and then to red. I stopped and rested my hands on the steering wheel, thinking about the years that had brought us to this moment. When Daniel first introduced Ashley to me nearly 12 years ago, she seemed warm and confident, the kind of young woman who always knew what she wanted. I had welcomed her into our family with genuine happiness. I believed that loving my son meant embracing the person he chose to build his life with. Over time, small things had begun to change. Ashley rarely asked for help directly. Instead, she spoke in careful suggestions. It would really help if someone could watch Tyler this afternoon. Daniel has such a demanding schedule lately. You are so good with him. The words were always polite, almost flattering, but the expectation behind them was clear. Slowly my calendar filled with responsibilities that had never been openly discussed. School pickups, weekend babysitting, last-minute dinners when both of them were too tired to cook. At first I told myself I was simply supporting my family. That was what mothers did. But somewhere along the way my role had quietly shifted from being part of their lives to being the solution whenever their lives became inconvenient. The traffic light turned green and I continued driving. Another message appeared on my phone while the car moved steadily along the road. Ashley again. Tyler is still at school. The office just called Daniel. They need someone to come get him soon. I felt a small ache in my chest when I read that. I loved my grandson deeply, and the idea of him waiting in the school office made me pause for a moment. But I also knew something else now that I had not understood before. One difficult afternoon would not harm him. Children were stronger than we often believed. They adapted quickly when the adults around them learned to handle their own responsibilities. I stopped the car in my driveway a few minutes later and turned off the engine. The quiet neighborhood stretched around me under the warm afternoon sun. My phone buzzed once more in my hand. Another message from Ashley appeared across the screen. Margaret, please call me as soon as possible. I stepped out of the car and walked slowly toward the front door of my house, feeling the steady calm of my decision settle deeper inside me with every step. I stepped inside the house and closed the front door behind me. The quiet wrapped around me immediately, calm and steady, the way it always had. I placed my purse on the small wooden table near the entryway and walked slowly into the kitchen. The sunlight had shifted while I was gone, now stretching in long, warm lines across the floor. I poured myself a glass of water and stood by the sink, listening to the faint sounds of the neighborhood outside. Somewhere down the street a dog barked once and then fell silent again. My phone vibrated on the counter. I glanced at the screen. Ashley again. This time she had left a voice message. I hesitated for a moment before pressing play. Her voice filled the quiet kitchen, tight and hurried. Margaret, I do not understand what is happening today. Tyler is still waiting at the school office. Daniel is trying to leave work, but it will take him at least 30 minutes to get there. You live 10 minutes away. Can you please just go pick him up? I will explain everything later. The message ended with a short click. I set the phone down and looked out the kitchen window again. The maple tree swayed gently in the breeze, its leaves glowing like small lanterns in the afternoon light. For years I had responded instantly to that kind of urgency. Whenever something in Daniel and Ashley's schedule went wrong, I filled the gap. I believed that was what kept families strong. But standing there in my quiet kitchen, I finally allowed myself to remember something clearly. Tyler had parents. Two capable adults who loved him and were responsible for his care. I was his grandmother, not the invisible structure holding their entire routine together. My phone buzzed again, but this time it was not Ashley. It was a call from an unfamiliar number. I answered out of curiosity. A polite woman's voice spoke from the other end. Hello, this is the administrative office at Lincoln Elementary School. Are you Margaret Collins? Yes, I replied. My name is Mrs. Patterson. Tyler Collins listed you as an emergency contact. We have been trying to reach his parents, but they said they are on their way from work. We just wanted to confirm someone will arrive shortly. I leaned lightly against the counter and spoke calmly. Yes, his father is on his way. Thank you for letting me know. The woman sounded relieved. That is good to hear. Tyler is fine. He is sitting here drawing while he waits. I smiled softly at the thought. Tyler had always enjoyed drawing dinosaurs and rockets in bright crayon colors. Thank you for taking care of him, I said. You are welcome, Mrs. Collins. The call ended, and the kitchen became quiet again. I placed the phone back on the counter and stood there for a moment. A strange sense of peace settled over me. The situation that had felt urgent a few minutes ago was already resolving itself without my involvement. Daniel would leave work. He would drive to the school. He would pick up his son. Life would continue exactly as it should. I walked into the living room and sat down in the armchair near the window. The fabric felt warm where the sunlight touched it. For the first time in many years, I noticed how comfortable the room felt in the middle of the afternoon. My phone buzzed again on the coffee table. A message from Daniel appeared on the screen. Got him. All good. I read the words and felt a quiet sense of relief, followed by something deeper. Understanding. For decades I had believed that stepping back would cause everything to fall apart. That if I stopped holding everything together, the delicate balance of family life would collapse. But nothing had collapsed. The afternoon sun still shone through the windows. Tyler had been picked up from school. Daniel and Ashley were handling their responsibilities exactly as they should have all along. I leaned back in the chair and looked around the familiar room. For the first time in years, the silence did not feel lonely. It felt like space. And inside that space, something new was beginning to grow. The quiet of the house stayed with me through the rest of the afternoon. I remained in the armchair for a while, watching the sunlight slowly shift across the living room floor. The long shadows from the maple tree outside moved gently across the carpet as the hours passed. At some point I stood up and walked into the kitchen to prepare a simple dinner for myself. I sliced a tomato, toasted a piece of bread, and poured a small bowl of soup from a container in the refrigerator. It was nothing elaborate, but the calm rhythm of preparing a meal just for myself felt strangely satisfying. For many years, dinner had been another task shaped by other people's schedules. I cooked what Daniel liked. I packed leftovers for Ashley and Tyler. I planned every meal around the possibility that someone might stop by unexpectedly. That evening, the kitchen belonged only to me. After dinner, I washed the dishes and dried them carefully before placing them back into the cabinet. The house remained peaceful, the way it used to feel long ago before my days became so full of obligations. Around 7:30, my phone buzzed again on the counter. This time it was a call from Daniel. I looked at the screen for a moment before answering. His voice sounded tired when I picked up. Mom, we made it home. Tyler is fine. I am glad to hear that, I said calmly. There was a short pause before he spoke again. Ashley was not very happy about today. I leaned lightly against the counter and listened without interrupting. Daniel continued speaking in the careful tone he used when trying to smooth over tension. She felt like the situation at the school could have been avoided. She thought maybe you did not realize how serious it was. I looked out the window where the evening sky had begun to fade into soft shades of blue and purple. Daniel, I understood the situation perfectly, I replied quietly. Another silence followed. For years those silences used to make me nervous. I would rush to fill them with explanations or apologies. That night, I allowed the quiet to remain exactly as it was. Daniel cleared his throat on the other end of the line. Mom, you have always helped us with Tyler. Today just felt different. It was different, I said gently. I am beginning to organize my days in a new way. Daniel seemed to struggle with that answer. What does that mean exactly? It means that I will still see Tyler and spend time with him when we plan it together. But I will no longer be available every time something unexpected happens. You and Ashley will need to manage those moments as his parents. The words were calm and steady, but they carried a truth that had taken me decades to learn. Daniel did not respond immediately. I imagined him standing in the kitchen of his own house, perhaps looking toward the living room where Tyler might be playing with his toys. Finally, he spoke again, his voice softer than before. I suppose we will figure it out. Yes, I said quietly. I believe you will. After we ended the call, I placed the phone back on the counter and turned off the kitchen light. The house settled into the peaceful stillness of evening. I walked slowly into the living room and stood by the window. Outside, the maple tree moved gently in the night breeze while the streetlights cast warm circles of light across the pavement. For the first time in many years, I felt something that had been missing for a long time. Balance. My love for my family had not disappeared. It had simply found its proper place again. And standing there in the quiet of my own home, I understood that this was only the beginning of a life that finally belonged to me. I slept deeply that night. When morning arrived, the sunlight entered the bedroom slowly through the thin white curtains, spreading soft light across the wooden floor. For many years, my mornings had begun with the quiet tension of expectation, the feeling that my phone might ring at any moment with another request or another problem that needed solving. That morning there was no such tension. The house was still. The world outside moved at its normal pace. But inside my small home, everything felt balanced and calm. I rose from bed, placed my slippers on the floor, and walked toward the kitchen. The smell of fresh morning air drifted through the slightly open window above the sink. I prepared a simple breakfast of toast, eggs, and a cup of coffee. The familiar routine felt peaceful instead of hurried. While I ate, I watched the neighborhood begin its day. A school bus rolled slowly down the street. A neighbor stepped outside to collect the newspaper from the driveway. The ordinary rhythm of life continued exactly as it always had. After breakfast, I washed the dishes and dried them carefully before placing them back in the cabinet. Then I walked into the living room and opened the curtains completely. The maple tree outside stood bright in the clear morning light, its autumn leaves glowing warm shades of orange and gold. I sat in the armchair near the window and allowed myself a quiet moment of reflection. The events of the previous day replayed gently in my mind. The phone call with Daniel. The worried message from Ashley. The call from the school office. Each moment had once felt like something I needed to fix immediately. Now they simply felt like ordinary parts of life that other people were capable of handling themselves. Around mid-morning, my phone buzzed softly on the coffee table. I glanced at the screen and saw a message from Daniel. Good morning, Mom. Tyler wants to know if you would like to come watch his soccer game this Saturday morning. It starts at 10 o'clock. I smiled when I read the message. This invitation felt different from the requests that had filled so many years before. It was not urgent. It was not an expectation. It was simply a question. I typed a short reply and sent it back. I would love to come watch him play. Tell Tyler I will bring orange slices for the team. A few seconds later, another message appeared. He will be happy to hear that. I set the phone down and leaned back in the chair. The room remained quiet except for the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. Outside, the leaves of the maple tree moved gently in the breeze. In that moment, I understood something that had taken most of my life to learn. Love does not disappear when you stop sacrificing yourself. In many ways, it becomes clearer and stronger. I would always love my son and my grandson. I would always be part of their lives. But my life also belonged to me now. The hours of the day no longer existed only to serve other people's plans. They held space for my own choices, my own interests, and my own quiet happiness. I stood up from the chair and walked toward the front door. The morning sun filled the entryway with warm light. Outside, the street looked peaceful and inviting, like the beginning of a new chapter that had been waiting patiently all along. I stepped onto the porch and breathed in the cool autumn air. For the first time in many years, the path ahead of me felt wide open, and I realized something simple but powerful. I had not lost my place in my family. I had simply found my place in my own life again.